Hey class, today we start modules 35 and 37, Social Thinking and Social Influence. These modules make up the topic of social psychology. Uh, in addition, there's a module 36 in the textbook with related to social psychology, but we're not going to cover that. We're just covering these two modules here in this course. So what is social psychology? The study of how the actual, imagined, or implied presence of others influences our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. We are social creatures in a social world, and no doubt about it, even though psychology spends a lot of time studying individual characteristics and traits like intelligence and personality, we are definitely influenced by our social surroundings and social environment, if you want to use that term. And one of the first things we look at in terms of our social thinking is attributions. And attributions are basically the explanations that we give for our behavior and even other people's behaviors when we're judging why other people are behaving the way they are. And generally, attributions would be one of two types: situational or external attributions, which would be something that's influencing your behavior that's beyond your control, and personal or internal attributions, which are internal characteristics or traits that you have that influence your behavior. So, for example, if a driver cut you off on the road, he changed lanes, maybe on Veterans Parkway, without using his turn signal, and almost clipped your front end of your car, you tend to come up with an inference about why the person did that. And if you think that person did it because he's an idiot, or he's stupid, or he's selfish because he's not looking out for other drivers, you're making a personal attribution about the person and the behavior that led to that attribution. If you consider, well, maybe he cut you off because he's bleeding profusely and he's trying to get to the hospital, well, that's kind of something that's not internal to him. It's a situational factor that influenced his behavior. So that would be a situational or external attribution. One of the things we should be aware of is the fundamental attribution error. That is our tendency to overestimate the influence of internal or personal traits and underestimate situational factors. And this applies when we're judging other people, not so much ourselves and our own behavior. But consider the picture on the screen there. You can see a guy jumping through a convenience store window. Looks like he's leaving the store. A woman is just left carrying a bag of goods. And your first impression of something like that might be that they're bad people, which would be an internal or personal attribution. On the other hand, we don't really know the situation they're in. And although I think everyone can agree that stealing is wrong, but sometimes maybe there's situations that would justify that. This particular picture, in fact, came from Hurricane Katrina, shortly after Hurricane Katrina, when the relief efforts were not very good due to the flooding and such, and there were a lot of people who were without food and water, not just for hours, but entire days. And so when you know the situation, you may judge those people a little differently. And so our tendency to overestimate personal traits, like I just did with that picture, assuming that they're bad people, for example, it's called the fundamental attribution error. And one of the reasons we underestimate situational factors is because we don't know all the situational factors that are occurring in someone else's life. So the tendency is for us to judge people's behavior according to internal or personal traits. So I have another example on the screen there. I think instructors, even though we are aware of the fundamental attribution error, we can still fall prey to that very easily. So, for example, if a student missed an assignment deadline early in the semester, and I don't know much about students early in the semester, my assumption might be that the student is lazy or irresponsible. And that's a personal or internal attribution I'm making for his behavior of getting his assignment turned in late. But I don't really know all the situational factors, so that's just an easy way for my brain to make conclusions. And there are a lot of situational factors or attributions that I could make that I just don't know about, though. Maybe the student had a death in the family. Maybe the student started a new medication and was violently ill the night he was planning to work on the assignment. Maybe he had car trouble. I mean, there are literally like a million possibilities, that good reasons that a student might not have that assignment turned in on time. But you can see how easy it would be for myself as an instructor and you in various situations, because we don't know those situational attributions and what those factors are. We just tend to generally summarize people's behavior in terms of their personal attributes. So it doesn't have to be bad attributes either, though. They can be good too. If you see somebody helping a homeless person, you probably easily can conclude that person is a good person, and you're making a personal attribution about that as well. Little do we know, maybe there's a situational factor that has influenced them to help that person. Maybe they aren't a good person. Maybe somebody just told them, hey, go take this money over to that person for me, will you? So maybe he gave the money because somebody asked him to. So that's the idea here, though, with the fundamental attribution error. And I think, in all honesty, this is one of those things that this can really help you on a daily basis if you stop to think about situational factors. Anytime somebody does something that bugs you or you find annoying, is just try to consider what are some situational factors that might have influenced their behavior. And quite honestly, it just causes you to stop and think about that, and maybe not be so judgmental towards other people. I do it a lot when I'm driving, quite honestly, because driving is something that I tend to get angry kind of easily driving with other drivers, and seems like they're never going quite fast enough for me and stuff like that. But I just try to always consider, like, if there's a slow driver in front of me and I'm getting annoyed, maybe it's the first time they've ever been in town and they're kind of trying to keep an eye on locations. Maybe they're looking for a certain business or something, and that's why they're going kind of slow, which to me is reasonable if you're looking for something that maybe you're going a little bit slower. And it just kind of helps keep my emotions in check. And I try to do that all the time on a regular basis. If I'm finding myself getting angry at somebody, I try to consider those situational factors. During Hurricane Katrina, of course, there was a lot of coverage in the media. And this was a couple pictures that occurred, or that were published in different media outlets. And these are the actual captions that appeared with those pictures. And of course, I bolded a key word in each caption to make a point. A lot of people noticed the two different pictures, and there was something about the captions that kind of angered a lot of people. And it has to do with the attributions that were being made. So if you look at the dark-skinned person who's carrying appears to be like a 12-pack of soda, it says that the young man walks through chest-deep floodwater after looting a grocery store. And looting implies, he stole it, he's a bad person kind of thing. On the other hand, the lighter-skinned people in the right-hand image, the caption said that they found bread and soda from a local grocery store, which sounds more situational, like, hey, they just happened to come across these, maybe floating in the water from a grocery store or something. But the point was that racial stereotypes perhaps influenced the choice of words. One person, it's kind of implied that he's a bad person. The other one, the light-skinned people, you kind of view them as being fortunate because they found some stuff. And you can see why some people were upset by that. But one word in each caption leads to a whole different kind of attribution that people might make about those people in the pictures. So for a long time in psychology, we've always known that your attitudes, like your likes and dislikes, can affect your behavior. I mean, no doubt about it. If you don't like Democrats, for example, then it will affect your behavior in a lot of ways. You will not vote for Democrats. You will probably spend more time talking to Republicans. There's all kinds of ways that your attitudes affect your actions. What psychologists learned sometime later with more research is that our actions actually have a pretty big effect on our attitudes as well. And the idea here is if you do something, your behavior can lead you to develop an attitude that is consistent with your behavior. One example of that is the foot in the door phenomenon, which is used oftentimes in sales. It's a compliance strategy, basically. And the idea is it kind of comes from the 1950s or so when a lot of people sold products door to door during the day. A lot of women stayed at home as homemakers back then. And so if you were going to sell a vacuum cleaner and you rang someone's doorbell and asked them if they wanted to buy a $200 vacuum cleaner, they would probably just close the door. So the idea would be, if your goal is to sell the vacuum cleaner, is to get people to agree to a small request first. Just if you can get them to let your foot in the door, you're that much closer to actually selling the vacuum cleaner. So it kind of works this way. If you agree to let somebody in your house to demonstrate the product, then if they ask you to grab the handle and try pushing the vacuum cleaner yourself, they're not really asking you to do that much more. So it's easier for people to agree to that request. And then you ask them if they want to empty the crumbs out of the bag. You're not asking them to do that much more, and why not? They let you in the door, and you just took it and vacuumed the carpet with it a little bit yourself. This is just one more small little request. It's no big deal. And the point is, though, each time you agree to a small request, then you're more likely to agree to a slightly larger request after that. And again, the reason that this is so effective is because if we start here and I want you to do something this big, asking you to do that can seem like a big obligation. But it's much easier to get you to do that if I ask you to do just this much and then follow that up with a slightly larger request and a slightly larger request. And then by the time you've complied to several requests, doing the last little bit doesn't seem like that much more anyway. And again, this is a common tactic that you see used in sales. If you go to buy a car, for example, they just want you to sit in the car, feel the steering wheel, feel the seats, then it's adjust the seats and go ahead and start it. Then why don't you take it for a little test drive? And ultimately, next thing you know, they're asking you how much money it would take for you to get you in that car. So much more effective than simply asking people in the parking lot, in the dealership lot, how much money they want to spend on that car. So along those same lines is that we play lots of different roles in life. And roles are a set of expectations for how we're supposed to behave in certain situations. You have a student role when you're in the classroom, for example. Those expectations for students have an effect on their behavior. Most students are relatively quiet during class. They may answer questions once in a while when asked, but rarely do you have a classroom full of people who are carrying on conversations during class because those are not the expectations. Likewise, if you have a job, when you go to work, there's a certain set of expectations for how you're supposed to behave. When you're with your parents, you may have some expectations for how you're supposed to behave around your parents and even around your friends. And the point is, all those roles that you play can lead to different types of behaviors. Well, as I said earlier, sometimes when you behave a certain way, your attitude can come into line with that. So your behaviors can affect attitudes. And if you go back to the example and consider the car salesman, perhaps once you drive that car and you've agreed to do all that and you park it back in the lot, suddenly your attitude about the car may be more positive than it was prior to that. So many years ago, Philip Zimbardo is a famous social psychologist. He did a little experiment to see how powerful social roles really were. And what they did is just converted the basement of Stanford University's psychology building into a mock prison. They recruited college students to participate. I think they were paid $10 or $15 a day. And half of them were randomly assigned as prisoners and half of them were randomly assigned as guards. And that was about it. They didn't really give them a lot of instructions for how to behave. They gave the guards guard uniforms and they gave the prisoners prisoner uniforms. And really just what they wanted to see was, would they start behaving like guards and would they start behaving like prisoners? And the idea here was that since they're not really telling them what to do, it's possible that they might all just hang out down there and shoot the breeze with each other, because let's face it, they're all just college students, right? But their idea was that if you give them uniforms and assign them the role of a guard, that there's a certain set of behavioral expectations that they will begin to fulfill. And that's really what they wanted to see. I'm going to show you a short clip of that video right now.
On the first day, I said, this is not going to work. I mean, the guards felt awkward giving orders, and they'd say, okay, line up, repeat your numbers, and the prisoners start giggling. And then a very interesting thing happened. Dave Eshelman, who the prisoners named John Wayne, like he's a Wild West cowboy, he begins to be more extreme.
I decided that I would become the worst, most intimidating, cruel prison guard that I could possibly be. I was sort of fascinated myself that people were believing the act, and I was trying to see how far I could take it before somebody would say, okay, that's enough, stop.
We did have to do things like push-ups. We would have to sing things. At the beginning, we protested some of the actions. We did things to irritate the guards.
So the guards' authority was challenged right off the bat. And the guards had to decide how they were going to handle it. And they had to decide it without our input. I mean, again, this was not a Milgram study in which we were standing over them telling them what to do. And they began to see the prisoners' behavior as kind of an affront to their authority. And they began to push back.
Ramp up the general harassment. Just sort of crank it up a bit. Nobody was telling me I shouldn't be doing this. The professor is the authority here. You know, he's the prison warden. He's not stopping me.
There was the first evening a kind of rebellion that took place.
The prisoners rebelled. They barricaded themselves in their cells and said, we refuse to come out. They took off their numbers. They didn't want to be de-individuated. They started cursing the guards to their face. And the key turning point was the guards began to think of them as dangerous prisoners. And so the guards formulated a plan, used fire extinguishers, took the doors down, dragged the prisoners out, stripped them naked, and essentially broke the rebellion in a purely physical way.
From that point on, the study was as remarkable a series of events as I've ever seen.
So the experiment, it was clear that people did take on the roles of prisoners and guards, despite the fact that they were all just college students. And they originally wanted that experiment to go for 14 days, but called it off after the 6th day when some of the prisoners started having emotional breakdowns, and some of the guards were starting to get pretty cruel in their treatment. So I'll save all the juicy details for you. I also post a video in Blackboard on that topic, so you can watch more of that if you want. It's pretty fascinating. So most of the time, our attitudes and our behaviors match pretty well. But sometimes we do have inconsistencies between our attitudes and our behaviors, or maybe we have inconsistencies between two different attitudes. When that happens, we experience cognitive dissonance, and that's the unpleasant state of tension that we may feel when we have these conflicts. And we don't like to feel that kind of conflict, so generally there are one of two things we can do to get rid of that feeling. One, we can change our behavior to make it in line with our attitudes, or two, we can continue behaving the way we are and adjust our attitudes to make them more in line with our behavior. And I like to use an example. There are some examples on the screen there, but I also like to use one that a lot of students can relate to. If you think back to all of your years of education, even in elementary school, most students can recall at least one time when they were going to cheat or cheated on some kind of homework assignment or something. And in most cases, even when we're young, we know that that's wrong. So we may experience a little bit of that uneasy feeling or tension. So we can either change our behavior and choose not to cheat, and then the dissonance goes away, or we can continue on with our plan to cheat and change our attitude to be in line with that. And one of the ways we would do that is maybe to kind of rationalize in our own mind why it would be okay to cheat. And of course, people can come up with all kinds of rationalizations, but maybe one student figures the teacher is so horrible that that cheating is the only logical way to get a decent grade in the class. Or maybe a student thinks, well, everyone else is probably cheating, which is ruining the whole curve, the grading curve. So I'm just kind of trying to keep up with the rest of the class, and that's the only reason I'm doing that. Whatever the case may be, though, rationalization for our behaviors is often a common outcome when we experience cognitive dissonance. In terms of social influence and how we're influenced by other groups, conformity is one of the major topics here. And conformity occurs when we change or adapt our attitude or behavior to be consistent with the norms of a group. And Solomon Asch conducted some famous experiments with conformity in the past. And there are a lot of factors that influence whether or not we're going to conform to other people. But I will say this, conformity is both good and bad. It's good to help you learn new things. You can watch other people and see how other people are behaving and adjust your behavior to fit in that way. But sometimes it's bad, particularly with if there's peer pressure to do something. And I suppose there's a lot of kids who have tried drugs for the first time, or drinking and driving, things like that, because their friends were maybe pressuring them to do that, and they just wanted to kind of fit in and adapt to that social group. I'm going to show you the clip of Solomon Asch's famous study on conformity, and it's a really simple task that participants had to do, which makes the outcome even more surprising.
Let's look at that study. The experiment you'll be taking part in today involves the perception of lengths of lines. As you can see here, I have a number of cards, and on each card there are several lines. Your task is a very simple one. You're to look at the line on the left and determine which of the three lines on the right is equal to it in length. All right, we'll proceed in this order. You'll give your answer.
Only one of the people in the group is a real subject, the fifth person with the white t-shirt. The others are Confederates of the experimenter and have been told to give wrong answers on some of the trials. The experiment begins uneventfully as subjects give their judgments.
2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3.
But on the third trial, something happens.
2, 2, 2, 2, 2.
The subject denies the evidence of his own eyes and yields to group influence.
1.
Ash found subjects went along with the group on 37% of the critical trials. But he found through interviews that they went along with the group for different reasons.
1. 1. They must be right. There are 4 of them and 1 of me. 1.
This subject's yielding is based on a distortion of his judgment. He genuinely believes that the group is correct.
1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2.
I know they're wrong, but what should I make waves?
2.
In this case, the subject knows he is right, but goes along to avoid the discomfort of disagreeing with the group. Here, the distortion is at the level of his response.
2, 2, 2.
So as you can see from the video, 37% of the time when the Confederates purposely gave the wrong answer, the true participant conformed and also gave the same incorrect answer. And 37% isn't a huge percentage of conformity, but when you consider the simplicity of that task, it is pretty significant. So there's lots of factors that influence conformity. You see those listed in your textbook. They're also listed on the screen here. But I would say that certainly when everyone in the group is unanimous, that's a pretty powerful influence on people. In fact, one of the great ways to break conformity is for one person to speak up and go against the group. What usually happens then is that they break conformity, and other people who were thinking along the same lines feel more comfortable speaking up and joining in their rebellion against the group. So that is unfortunately one of the difficult things for people to do, though, because if there are lots of people in the group thinking that everyone agrees with the group, then the possibility exists that nobody actually speaks out against the group, and then everyone conforms. So if you have somebody who is strong enough, has some willpower to speak out against the group, you usually find that there's some support. Other people will support you in that endeavor. So along those lines also is the topic of obedience. And obedience is, unlike conformity where we adjust our behavior to fit in with the group, obedience is complying with a direct command from somebody. Generally, a person is an authority figure of some sort. And that is one of the key features of obedience. We tend to obey orders from people who we admire, or people we trust, or people who are in a position of authority over us. For example, you'd be more likely to get on the ground and spread your arms and legs apart if a policeman told you to do that than you would if some kid rode up to you, a third grader rode up to you on his bike and told you to get on the ground and spread your arms and legs. You'd probably laugh at him, right? So that is one of the key features there. And a lot of what we learned about obedience came from a famous study by Stanley Milgram. And Milgram's goal was to kind of try to understand better how so many German soldiers could do so many horrible things to the Jews during the Holocaust. And because, the idea was kind of like, are German soldiers and German citizens just like morally bankrupt in some way? Maybe it's something in their gene line, in the gene pool for Germans. But he kind of felt like that wasn't a good explanation. And he wondered if normal, ordinary, everyday people would be willing to do bad things to others if somebody in a position of authority was telling them to do that. And so he developed an experiment to measure the rate of obedience among people. And I'm going to go ahead and show you a clip of that. Like the other experiments, I have the full longer clip available in Blackboard if you want to see it in its entirety. Now, there is a lot of footage of Milgram's original experiment online. I'm going to actually show you a modern day replication of his study. It was carried out exactly as Milgram did, and I'm going to show you that because the quality of the video is a little better than some of the old footage from the 50s and 60s.
You don't know each other. No, we don't actually know how punishment affects learning.
After a brief introduction, our subjects are tricked into thinking they've chosen their role as teachers in the experiment.
And if you could just tell me what your positions are. Learner, I'm teacher. Learner.
Our subjects observe the learner being instructed by the scientist, who is just another actor.
This electrode is connected to a generator in the second room. All right, we go with the teacher. Okay. Just make sure that we have a good contact with the skin so it doesn't cause any blistering or burning. Is that comfortable?
That's okay.
Again, we just place these straps around your arms to avoid any excess movement. Those aren't too tight.
No, that's okay.
No. The teacher will read out some word pairs to you. Blue.
The learner is told he's going to be asked a series of memory questions by the teacher. He will have to remember word pairs and then correctly remember them when offered multiple choices.
If the answer is incorrect, you will receive an electric shock.
The teacher is then taken next door and shown the generator, which ranges from 15 volts all the way up to a lethal 450 volts. The domestic electricity supply in the UK is, of course, 240 volts. Our teachers are given the list of questions and told to increase the voltage each time the learner gets a question wrong. They are then given an example of a low voltage shock.
And try and estimate in volts the amount of shock you're getting.
Okay.
Do you know how much that was?
75.
It was actually 45.
Oh my god.
Did you begin?
Shoe, horn, steam. The point of this test is to see whether the teachers, our subjects, will call a stop to the experiment or continue to the point where they are administering seemingly lethal electric shocks to the victim simply because the scientist is telling them to.
That's correct.
According to plan, our accomplice provided many wrong answers. Each protest was coordinated to a particular shock voltage on the generator, and his responses were played via a CD.
That's wrong, 150 volts. The correct answer is Captain Shoe. Cup. That's wrong. 225 volts. He's in a lot of pain.
Continue, please.
But he's not comfortable.
I must continue to the end of the experiment. The learner likes it or not, he has to go on until he's learned the words correct.
Okay. Forest. That's wrong, 240 volts. Are you sure this is not causing any lasting damage? He sounds like he's in a lot of pain.
Well, the shocks might be painful, they're not harmful.
What does that mean, though? They're not harmful. Sorry, I'm not getting you. When you say that they might be painful but not harmful,
They cause no long-term damage.
okay, so what does that mean? That it doesn't leave any scars?
It causes no damage.
That seems very cold and calculated to me. This doesn't seem like a very. Anyway, golden. That's wrong, mate. 300 volts. staple. The options are diet, jar, balcony, and bowl.
If the learner doesn't answer in a reasonable time, say 4 to 5 seconds, then you have to treat the answer as wrong and follow that procedure.
Did you hear that, learner? Just any response, mate. Come on. Wild guess.
Please continue.
345 volts. If you're still with me, I'm sorry. I can't do this, honestly. Can we stop this experiment? Because I can't do this.
If you don't continue, we'll have to discontinue the experiment.
Yeah, okay, fine. That's fine. I'm not going to do this.
Incorrect. 450 volts. You promise he's not. It won't.
Please continue with the procedure.
Like, it hurts, but it's because it's like it says they're dangerous emission. It'll be alright. Yeah.
Please continue. Okay, I think we'll discontinue the experiment then.
All of the subjects were told the true nature of the experiment was to see how they would respond to authority, and that it would eventually form part of this show.
He's okay.
I can tell you, yeah, he's absolutely fine. You actually weren't administering electric shocks at all. He is.
In the original Milgram experiment, psychologists were asked to predict how many people would continue to the point that they were administering the highest shock on the board. Their prediction was 0.1%. They were wrong. The results of our experiment were almost identical to the original. Over 50% of participants continued up to 450 volts.
So the results of Milgram's studies were pretty much replicated by this more modern replication that occurred in the UK. And that was kind of interesting because of ethical guidelines, the emotional turmoil that the participants went through. Research institutions like colleges or universities won't allow that study to be replicated today. So it's kind of neat, though, that somebody was able to replicate that outside the realm of an institution, because we've often considered that maybe by today's standards, maybe today's generation of people aren't as obedient to authority as people were back in the 50s and 60s, and maybe the results would be different. But they really weren't very different. In Milgram's original study, 65% of participants went all the way to the end of the shock board. And those results were shocking. That's a good one, Mr. Schmidt. Because, yeah, the experts estimated that less than 1% of people would do something like that. So we got to be careful not to fall prey to the fundamental attribution error and assume that those are bad people who did that. That's just the power of the situation they were in with a person who was in position of authority. Milgram, thankfully, also did different variations on this experiment to kind of understand what factors might influence obedience. And one of them in particular, he had a secretary come into the room and tell the researcher that he had an important phone call. And so she took over for him while he was gone. And as soon as the secretary took over, most of the people quit participating. They refused to go on because the key there was the researcher was seen as an authority figure, and the secretary was not seen as an authority figure. So people had no problems disobeying the secretary. So there are some other factors that increase the likelihood of obedience, but authority figure is certainly one of the key features to that. Another way that groups influence us has to do with our performance on a task, and that's what social facilitation has to do with. Social facilitation is probably one of the reasons that in most sports, when teams play on their home court, they tend to win a greater percentage of games. There does seem to be a home court advantage, and that has to do a lot with knowing that most of the people who are watching you are supporting you and not judging you harshly. And so social facilitation is the tendency for people to perform better on well-learned tasks in the presence of others. On the other hand, though, if you're performing a difficult task in the presence of other people, it can actually hurt your performance. So I used to think about when I was in school, I was pretty good in math, and I would have no problems working most math problems on a piece of paper at my desk, but I hated when the teacher called me up to the board to work on a problem in front of the whole class. Suddenly, if it was a difficult problem in particular, it just felt like my brain wasn't working well. You feel like everyone's watching you, people are judging you, and it actually makes it more difficult to solve problems on the board in that case. So, but if it was a real simple task like 6 + 4, and I was in 8th grade, I would have no problem solving that because it was so simple. So that is the idea behind social facilitation, and I want to point this out one more time, that social facilitation has to do with your performance on task. And I say that because we have some related concepts coming up here that are kind of similar, but each one has its own kind of special emphasis. Group polarization is another similar concept. The idea here has to do mostly with your beliefs and attitudes. And with group polarization, the idea is that if you're with other people in a group who share your beliefs or your attitudes about something, by discussing your beliefs in that group, your beliefs tend to become stronger. And some research has shown that people who are high in prejudice, if they're in a group with other highly prejudiced people and they're discussing race issues, they tend to be even slightly more prejudiced after that group discussion. On the other hand, people who are low in prejudice, if they're talking with other people in a group who are low in prejudice, they tend to be even lower in their prejudice. So it just depends where your attitudes or beliefs are, but whatever the case is, being in a group of people who have the same belief tends to strengthen our beliefs. And polarization means that the group's beliefs become more polarized or different from people who are not in your group. Groupthink is the third similar concept, and groupthink has to do mostly with decision making. So social facilitation is performance, group polarization is your beliefs and attitudes, and groupthink has to do mostly with decision making. Groupthink, generally there probably is some polarization and conformity occurring. This is when a group of people have a strong vested interest in maintaining harmony within the group, and sometimes then decisions are made because people want to maintain harmony. They don't necessarily want to disagree with another person's idea. They want the group to appear to be unanimous and strong, particularly to outside people. And sometimes the decision that's proposed isn't always the best decision, but it's not uncommon for groups to go with that decision because they want to maintain harmony. Nobody wants to rock the boat and create problems in the group. This is largely what was responsible for the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. I think that was in 1986, when temperatures were pretty low, uncharacteristically low for Florida. They had scratched the launch several times due to technical issues and weather issues, and it finally got a nice sunny day, but it was a cool day, very cool. And the engineers who designed the rubber bushings or seals for the fuel lines and the fuel tanks contacted NASA and suggested that they not launch because the cold temperatures could have shrunken the rubber seals, which would make them ineffective in sealing off the fuel correctly. but the project managers for NASA were feeling a lot of pressure to get this thing launched after so many delays. Plus, they had a school teacher who was on board. She was going to be the first citizen to go into outer space. Her name was Christy McCullough. And the managers, project managers, basically ignored the engineers and voted unanimously to launch. And unfortunately, there were fuel problems, which led to the explosion and the loss of all 7 astronauts. After that, of course, there was an investigation into everything related to that, and some of the project managers who voted unanimously to launch, after the fact, some of them said that they really didn't want to launch, but they didn't want to cause any problems. They wanted to maintain harmony in the group. They didn't want to be the black sheep or the troublemaker in the group, so they just agreed to go along with the rest of the group. Unfortunately, that cost 7 lives right there. The last topic in this section is from Module 37, and it's in the section about altruism. And I'm not going to really ask you about altruism, but altruism is when we do things to help other people, so pro-social behaviors. But what I'm most interested in you knowing is the bystander effect. And this occurs when somebody is in need of help. The tendency is for people are less likely to get involved in help if there are more people around. And it sounds kind of counterintuitive, which is why it's an interesting phenomenon. Because you'd think if there are a lot of people around, someone who needs help would get help more quickly. But the problem here is that when we are in groups of other people, our sense of personal responsibility kind of gets diffused. And so we kind of assume like, well, somebody else is probably going to jump in and help. And the problem is lots of people are thinking the same thing and nobody's actually taking any action. If you've been trained in first aid or CPR or anything like that, one of the things they teach you to do is if you take charge of a situation is to point to somebody and tell them what you want them to do. So you would point to somebody and say, call 911. Because if you don't point to anyone specific and you just tell a group of bystanders, somebody call 911, oftentimes it takes a lot longer for somebody to actually do that because everyone thinks somebody else is going to do it. So unfortunately, the bystander effect is pretty common. And we've demonstrated that in a lot of experiments, and we also see it oftentimes in real life. We'll see stories about that in the news. So some more famous research on this came from Latané and Darley, and I'm going to show you a clip of some of their research.
That shocked the city. Now, it's not that a person got murdered that shocked the city. That happens, sadly. It's that a person got murdered and her neighbors watched and nobody did anything. Bibb Latané and I, we read about the murder as did everybody else. Here we were 2 young social psychologists starting our research careers. We knew about Stanley Milgram's set of experiments on obedience to authority. And we started to think about, in an offhand way, what could have produced the Genovese effect.
Perhaps Peter Genovese might have been alive today, but fewer people could have seen her.
There were perhaps 38 people who could have responded, but each were looking to see what these other people were doing.
We decided to try to create a relatively ambiguous situation in which we could see how people responded. We thought that one kind of thing that comes up that's often hard to tell whether it's a real emergency or not has to do with fire.
You see smoke coming through the vent, and it is ambiguous. What do you do?
There's smoke coming out from under the door in that room where we're filling out the questionnaire.
Almost everybody does that if they face the smoke alone. Now let's have you face the smoke with 2 strangers. One person can be seen glancing at the other. The other is continuing to fill out the questionnaire. It's getting a little more smoky in the room, but nonetheless, you stay in the room. By and large, people surrounded by people who react as if there's nothing wrong don't respond. Everybody sees the other people not reacting, so they create a definition of the situation. No emergency.
To test their theories about how groups and individuals respond differently to a crisis, Darley and Latine conducted a second experiment. This time, the emergency was clearly defined.
First of all, I'd like to thank the two of you for being here today to help out in the study.
In this experiment, one student was asked to communicate via intercom with another student down the hall.
Could somebody give me a little help here, because I'm having a problem. I don't want one of these things coming on.
What sounded like a real seizure in the subject's headphones was just a tape recording of an actor playing a role for the experiment.
If somebody would give me a little help, well, could somebody help?
If you knew there was nobody else but you to help, you got up, you opened the door of your room, and you headed off to find the person. On the other hand, if there were 3 or 4 other people present who you heard,
We'd like to thank the three of you for being here today to help us with this study. We are interested in learning.
you are much less likely to respond yourself.
Somebody, give me a little help here. I'm having a real problem right now. Help me out.
The responsibility any individual feels for helping is diffused when there are other people who could also help. So what can we say back to the bystanders in the Genovese situation? The first
And I'm going to show you a short clip from another study related to the bystander effect.
Liverpool Street Station in London. A drunk lies on the pavement. In fact, he's our actor Peter, but these passers-by ought to know that. And since he looks the worse for wear, not critically ill, they ignore him. Helping would be inconvenient or even risky. He lies there for 20 minutes, and no one raises an eyebrow. This time, we dress Peter as a respectable city gent. How long before he's rescued now that he looks the part?
How are you staying?
I'm alright. 6 seconds. She even calls him sir. And suddenly, everyone's a good Samaritan.
You suffer from epilepsy?
No. Our actress Ruth takes Peter's place. She's not a drunk, but she's also not a city gent. How long before she gets help? Four minutes have passed, and 34 people have passed.
People don't really want to know. They just haven't got the time. Well, they have got the time, they just don't get involved.
But it's more complicated than that. If the street were deserted, a passerby would probably go to the rescue. But these strangers have silently formed a temporary group with a rule: don't help. This woman, for instance, has clearly spotted Ruth, but she conforms to the rule and does nothing. Watch what happens, though, when someone else helps. She suddenly finds herself in a different group with a new rule: to help.
So as you saw towards the end of that clip, when one person broke the conformity and went in to approach the woman to see if she needed help, it was a lot easier for other people to join in. So in real life, it's always easy to, in hindsight, to say, wow, somebody should have jumped in and helped. But there's a lot of factors that influence whether or not people will help. And, one of those is first of all, you have to interpret the situation as an emergency. But also, if you don't feel competent enough to help, or If the situation is kind of ambiguous in terms of your safety, those are important things that people have to consider. So I say that because we all probably find ourselves in situations from time to time where we don't jump in to help, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. A lot of people get a bad rap for that in the media when you hear stories like this, but you have to consider your personal safety, and if you're in a group of people that you think are more knowledgeable than you, oftentimes people withhold their support. So for example, if I'm at the pool and I see somebody struggling in the deep water, I would not jump in personally to help that person because I would probably drown myself. I know I'm not a good swimmer, but I would quickly, as fast as I could, try to find somebody else that might be able to help, because I know there are people at the pool who are better swimmers than I am who would do a better job helping that person out of the water. So, all right, so that wraps up our topic of social psychology, and thank you for listening, and we'll see you with the next topic.